What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another This Week in Challengers. The Call of Duty season, we're kicking it off hot, and Challengers is definitely riding that same wave. Enigma, we have some very fun topics to talk about today. We're going to be talking about some teams that are looking very good early because there are some Challengers teams that have been turning some heads. But what else are we talking about here today?
Well, we're going to then move on to the OpTic Nation roster, which is one of the teams that I feel has been in everybody's mouth through the last week or so. So it's about time we start stepping into that conversation. Sir, don't look at me like that. Then we've also got to get to the fact that the Challengers Cup is going to be coming up this weekend, of course, as CDL kicks off, as you said. But we're not done there, Dan. A couple more things on the list, I believe.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Stallions Black Open tryouts, as well as some people in the Challenger scene that you, yes, you, the viewer, should be following if you want to stay up to date on everything Challengers that is coming on down the line. We are not the only people. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without a lot of these people as well. So without further ado, let's hop on into it. All right, first thing we got to talk about is some of these Challengers teams that are looking good very, very early on. There's been a couple of events that have happened over the last week with a lot of these Challengers teams, I think, really showcasing that they should have all eyes on them. And there's a very important first one that I'm really excited for us to cover because we saw some semblance of some signs of life from them last year, and it feels like they are really starting to find their footing here in Black Ops 7.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it has to be none other than this Cabal roster. This is a team that a lot of us, again, we kind of saw inklings, signs from some of the players on this team, on this roster, that we thought, all right, can you go that extra step? Can you go from being a good Challengers player, which is kind of that limit where some people just fall off eventually, that's their ceiling, and they don't really make it beyond there. Maybe get themselves into the elite, but don't really threaten anything further than that, to being a bit more... Certainly getting that with these four. They won the $500 even Challenger Stats Showcase Invitational. And you and me, man, we got to cast over them. Yeah. They were ridiculously good. I mean, you get it there. They dropped only 2 maps all tournament. Both of them were Overload. They were diabolical when it came to Overload, to be quite honest with you. Complete crap, blown out of the water. But anything that came down to Hardpoint, S&D, ran over everything in front of them. And a big thing that you and me talked about was the way they looked like an actual team. KB here, he was running the sniper, putting up really big numbers. Millie was putting up huge numbers. Rupert was making superstar plays left, right, and center. And Icons was often the guy on the rotation, being that glue player, that intangible player that we speak so often about. And all 4 of them looked so comfortable together, so much further ahead than pretty much anything else we saw.
Yeah, I mean, obviously winning an event like this is sort of one of those things you would look at with a lot of teams. But for me, it was the eye test, dude. It was when we were in those games, there were moments that I'm like, that's a really good play, my man. Seeing them come on out. And a lot of like the litmus test that I use with a lot of teams, and especially in Challengers, I think this is very true, right? If you look at past rosters from, past championship teams, it's that every single person on that team has the capability to have their moment, right? There's a lot of times when we look at these rosters, it's maybe only 1 or 2 people that are able to have those. And that's why you see so much sort of churn here in Challengers, because everybody's trying to find that 4 where everybody's able to have their moment. For Cabal, every single one of them had those, points on the map where they were able to go huge. You mentioned a couple of them, right? In the Search and Destroy, it's KB with the sniper. It was Icons, getting the route man gets paid, or even just doing some of that dirty work, being able to go on through. So I liked what I saw there. The other thing that I really saw from Cabal that made me kind of have that, like, okay, this is a team we really have to watch, is their mid-map adjustments. And normally when we're talking mid-map adjustments, it's all Search and Destroy, right? But they were doing some stuff in the hard point. I'm thinking back to that Scar that we casted, right? It was first set of rotations, neck and neck against the Seaman Co. Second set of rotations, they make all of the changes they need to make, and they are able to really kind of run away with it on that second set. And just seeing them be able to do that time and time again was really clutch. There's also a moment in a later series, I forget who they were going against, but Seymour and I were casting it, and it was in that Overload, where they actually had some signs of life. They actually looked good in an Overload, right? And they were able to, they immediately get a score, Enigma, and then they flip it. They force a spawn because they understand how it works, and they get a second score immediately right off of it. So making some of those adjustments to me was really, really fun to see with this Cabal roster.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about those 2 examples, because the one that I instantly think of was actually the exposure hard point, where they played the first set of rotations relatively close, and they recognized that actually P2 was something that if the opposing team rotated in first, they could set themselves up and claw back this lead that Cabal had built. I forget who they were against. I think it was a Seaman Co. maybe, but I forget. And basically what Icons did was play himself out over there very early, far earlier than he needed to, in order to make sure that there was no such setup. Just kept himself alive, really. Finds a few kills, sure, but just kept himself a bit of a thorn in the side, which then allowed his teams to flood in through mid because they had P1 control. So it's just moments like that where he's kind of going, okay, this team, what they like to do is give up the old kill early, rotate into new early, and be unbreakable from there. I'm not going to give them the chance to do that. And it was the willingness to just kind of, again, be that glue guy, be ahead of the game in that sense, but make that adjustment so often through this tournament that is just setting them so far above so many teams in the minute, far above where many people would have probably put them before we played any COD this year.
Yeah, and I think it's the only, you called it out, the only thing that I'm looking for from this team is figuring out overload, right? You can't have an abysmal third game mode. The third game mode has always been really interesting, right? But they look so good in Hardpoint and Search and Destroy that it feels like, hey, whatever you're doing there, keep doing it. Go ahead, hit some of the VOD review for overload. Cabal isn't the only team in Challengers turning heads, though. We also had 5 Fears come out swinging, though, Enigma, and they are also another team that I think a lot of people are going to be looking at.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I really like this team. I feel like they got screwed over a little bit at the start of the season. There was an invitational where a lot of Challengers teams got to go along and play against the pro teams, and 5 Fears here were probably a team that should have been invited. I think Fire himself tweeted something out, kind of being like, we're one of the only teams that made it out of groups when it came to EWC. We then don't get the invite to this. It's a tough one because the reason they didn't get the invite, of course, is probably more to do with fame than actual performance.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but they're definitely a team that deserve the kind of love that they're getting on the performance side of things.
Sure.
Exceed certainly announced himself back a little bit after some pretty bad reputation previously for some of his bits and pieces. Fire, another one of those players who's kind of had to prove himself again after a pretty abysmal performance when he was in the league previously. And these players have gone through that, very much so dug deep. Rex, Darkside, these are players who have been around for a while and I'd love to see more of. Obviously, Rex got his shot as well in the league and was one of those players that was kind of put in a situation where you couldn't possibly win. Unless he went nuclear and carried entirely. In that situation, I just don't think you could have won. And several of these players are kind of in that boat. So it's nice to see them looking really strong. Doesn't get much better either than beating out some of the other top competition in this Call of Duty Agent Cup. This is going to be a case of, I think it was one of the Falcons Academy teams that you beat in the end. Yeah, it was the Arcites Priest, the Paulex, and King of Body roster that you ended up dumping on. But it was also then Stallions and a lot of these teams that are towards the top of the pecking order. Of course, you don't get everybody in there. We will do when we get that first cup coming up. But this is a great way to show where you're at already.
Yeah, and this is kind of one of those, just a scoreboard from one of those early events, going against Stallions like we saw. A very good Challengers team very early on, right? And just you can even see just some of the numbers some of these guys are putting on up is pretty insane. I'm looking mainly at Dylan Rex and Exceed, 2 names that you called out. Right? 38 and 26 and 35-25 on a hardpoint scar are definitely some really solid numbers. I mean, even look at Dylan Rex, dude. Almost 4,700 damage in a hardpoint game is a lot. And this did go down to the very end, right? 250 to 219. So very close. But even then, I'm right there with you. I think that when we kind of, if you've been watching Challengers, these 4 players, right? They've been here forever. They've been playing alongside, even, people like Exceed and Fire making their, sort of blips into the league that are there. And this just feels like this is one of those Challengers teams that's going to kind of come together of 4 players who know how to win, who know how to play Call of Duty and are going to be a problem from the very early stages all the way to our Challenger sort of champs that kind of goes on, right? With some of the elites that are going through. So I think that they're going to be a big problem for a lot of these teams just because sometimes you have those fundamentals that you can sort of rely on as a Challengers team, and this team has a lot of those. So I really like what we're seeing. I'm right there with you. Was very surprised they also didn't get the invite, but I think this team has a lot on their plate, especially when it comes to the Challenger season, that they're kind of either a boom or bust. They're either going to be making it to those semifinals, those grand finals every single time, or we maybe might see them have to make some early roster moves.
I think because of the fact that Exceed, Fire, and Rex have already been in the league and it didn't go very well, I think they have to be a boom, and they don't, and more than once. It can't just be a case of, these guys won the most recent elite and they're going to get instantly picked up. I don't know if you'll get away with that, because I think if you've already been in the league and not had a good performance, you need to prove that you're a step above what you were when you were picked up last time. So I think that these guys have got to go on a bit of a spree, and it's just whether or not you can handle that, because once you go to the top, you're then the target, you're then the standard bearer. Everybody closes the gap towards you. It's just how it works. And so these guys are going to have to really put on stuff like this. Is a reassuring early point, but it's going to have to be a case of, okay, what do you look like in the first 3 cups and into the first elite, not just that first weekend. There's got to be quite a bit about this team. And I think the one thing that leaves me a little bit concerned outside of the performance factor What's it like inside the comms? What's it like inside the Discord? Are they all getting on? Because this certainly has a couple of personalities in there that might fracture should they crumble underneath that pressure. So hoping that they can keep their heads on and just play their game. If so, might see a couple of them back in. Okay, so that is two teams kind of boxed off that we really needed to talk about, but there's definitely a third one, and for better or for worse, they're going to bring a lot of eyes to challengers. They're also going to have a lot of eyes on them. It is going to be the OpTic Nation roster. Now, this is Renegade, Bound, Neum, and Kips, or should I say was, because they've already made a change. Literally half an hour before we hit record, thank God, because the last time we recorded something, everything changed just after we finished. So yeah, this team going to be very much so everyone's kind of hopeful story that they do well, but where do we feel that they're at right now?
Well, it's such an interesting team to talk about, because when I saw this tweet come out that was like, hey, it's Renegade and Bound matched up with Neum and Kips, I was like, this has the potential to be a God Squad, right? One of the big sort of talking points in the offseason was obviously with the HCS kind of being on I'm going to call it a hiatus. A lot of these top Halo pros are starting to move on over here towards Call of Duty. So we see Legend gets a spot in the league. There's not enough spots for an entire other game's, competitive rosters to start making their way on in. So you're going to see a lot of these people making their way into challengers. And that's why I was so excited to see Renegade and Bound join up together, because if you watched Halo at all, you understood how devastating this duo could be on a map. And I was really excited to see them kind of learn, obviously, Call of Duty. But as with all things challengers, every single day is a brand new day for stuff to change. Like you said, Bound apparently, after maybe some scrims going through, we'll pull up maybe some scrim results here on the screen. This is with that roster originally. Maybe isn't super feeling it. I'm not going to sit here and speculate why Bound maybe doesn't want to play challengers. That's for him to come out and talk about, right? But obviously, maybe didn't look the best or didn't come on through. I think we can talk about results. That's what we have. So you see Bound get taken on out, and we see, of course, Rispy has now been moved on into that roster. I think that I really still like this roster. I think if you kind of look at challengers players available, Rispy definitely still a good fourth to slot in. The main person that I'm really excited to see on this roster is Neum, right? I think on that Challenger Showcase broadcast that you and I did, we kind of hyped up Neum, and in that first match that we watched against Cabal, that Seaman Co roster, kind of the matchup, it looked close, but I'm kind of convinced that it only looked close because of some huge hero plays from Neum himself in order to keep them into some of those games that are there. So when we kind of look at this roster, I think there's a lot to prove, but I think Renegade surrounding himself with 3 of these caliber of players is going to allow him, I think, to kind of come online in the game a lot faster than people expect.
Yeah, I like the call, because I think one of the things to touch on here is, like, obviously this OpTic Nation roster, they kind of came together, instantly had a tough time in scrims, and people were on their ass. Yeah. People were going for the neck. And I'm like, these are 2 guys coming over. This is also basically a sophomore playing right now. This is a young team in terms of Call of Duty. This is a young roster in terms of understanding competitive COD. They need time. Again, whatever Bound's reasons are, I'm sure that, it might just be a case of taking a break. As much as it's a wonderful thing to be a competitor, it is an intense lifestyle, and the opportunity to actually sit back for a year might not be the worst thing in the world, to be completely honest with you. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how these Halo players do transitioning over. We've seen a lot do it in the past. Very famous names, of course, in Enable, Crimsix. Now we're talking about Neptune, obviously Shotzi from back in the day. There's a lot of players that have done incredible things. Shotzi was very far from the article that he is today when he first started. A lot of people question whether or not he should have been in the league at all initially. I remember him having an absolute stinker of an event in his first one. So it's going to take time for these fellas to adjust. The fact that you're alongside potential breakout stars is huge. But one of the things I really like here for Neum, Rispy, and Kips, if you do well here, you have an opportunity to cement yourself into OpTic folklore, because they will, without doubt, come and support this squad in numbers. A lot of pressure, but if you can deal with it, bloody hell, you're coming out smelling the roses.
No, I love that you kind of bring it up, because that's the other thing going for this roster that I was there, is that it's a lot of support going through, right? You kind of have Zinni, is as much as a meme some people like to make it. He's the GM, right? And I think that, Renegade having is just sort of a little bit, yes, I did intentionally call him Renegade. I want to be very clear. The fact that Renegade has the support system, like somebody like Zinni nearby, obviously just coming off of a very successful Halo season with Formal, one of the best to ever do it. So he can now go to Formal with advice, right? You have so much just depth in that OpTic camp that he can actually kind of go ahead and maybe sort of get some tips and tricks, all the way through. But I also like what you say there, where it's an opportunity to kind of have the green wall behind you. We haven't had that in challengers for a very long time. So the fact that this is the roster that has that support, I think, is phenomenal. All right, so we've talked about some heavy hitting teams that are going to be in challengers this year, and you're going to have an opportunity to take a look at them because, Nemo, we got Challengers Cups coming up, baby. It's our sort of first look at some of these teams. So let's walk through some of the teams that we are going to be seeing in these cups through NA, through EU. We do have, of course, the list of all of the teams and their current points. So help me walk through this.
Yeah, so we'll kind of touch on some of these lightly, because obviously there's a lot of names yawning midstream. My apologies, but I am tired. Yuli, 2 Real Awakening, and Gia. That's going to kick us off. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise for anybody that they're top of the list. Obviously, these are players who've largely just fallen out of the league, or very recently been a part of the league. So this should be a very good team. It's one of those weird ones sometimes in challenges where teams come together like this, and you think they're going to run over everything, and then they're kind of a bust a bit. So it's will you, won't you? I have a lot of close eyes on this, but they'll hold top spot in terms of PPs for now. Funny, this is a P7 Notorious. This is basically a combination of 2 different organizations' rosters, which is not unusual to challenge, I guess. Brack, Eric Boom, Fellow, and Nate. This is an interesting roster on Nate's behalf. I think obviously Fellow was league last year. Eric Boom was league. Brack, he's been in and out of the league. But they decided to go with this young gun, this young lad who's just about turned 18, I believe, who's able to compete now this year. I think that's a big call because as much as it probably only changes you from first to second in terms of pro points, I think that's an interesting one because if you're such an experienced roster that you want to get back into the league, you're probably thinking, we just want to get straight back in there with some experience. Yeah. Very ballsy to pick him up.
I think that's a good shout, right? I mean, and that's sort of what seems to be the half and half with a lot of these rosters, right? It's either I was looking at, man, I'm like, we have a lot of just like CDL, at least some players who have gotten into the CDL, even just for a small stint, like these top 5 or 6 teams, like all have players who have done that, right? And so when I think this is kind of nice, the reason I was so excited to talk about this, I think, leading into Cup 1, is that when you look at this list, about half of this list, dude, is like these rosters that I look at and go, oh yeah, that's a really good roster. Now, obviously, execution matters more, but it's like, okay, this is going to be really fun to watch, considering the amount of talent that we have in challengers, at least in North America, when you look at a lot of these teams that are here, right? So a couple different teams that I'm excited. I'm also excited to see a lot of the sort of challenger special, players that, will always are in here, kind of see how they stack up against some of these, what I would say, arguably, kind of tier 1 challengers teams, right? And how do they stack up with their skills? Because that's the reality. Is every year in challengers, we always get one of these teams who we never think will do good, but then just becomes an absolute, menace by the time we're done.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the thing is, like, any player really inside the top 5 teams, maybe even beyond that, but especially those top 5 teams, any one of those 20 players, if we're sat here at the end of the year and they've had a pop-off and managed to make it on through, except for Doug Sensor Martin, into the league, I don't think we'd be particularly surprised. So, yeah, sorry, Doug. But, some real talent, real depth. And even beyond that, you've then got players that are going to be interesting to watch just because it's like, okay, you've got this big breakout year. Also got to pay attention to who Hamza and Illy end up playing with. But yeah, it's a case of, okay, can you have this big breakout moment? What's the story coming into this year? So there's a lot of talent to talk about there in North America. I guess we hop over to Europe and kind of discuss some of the players that we have over there as well. Now, obviously, Europe, we're not expecting as much depth. We're not expecting this to be... we just have that situation in Europe where basically in North America, you probably have 8 teams that could be matched by maybe our top 4 and stuff like that. That's kind of how it works out in almost ratio. But here we're going to have F. Harry, Mythics, and Denza towards the top here, followed up by Henry, Aspect, Chunk, and Detain. I think that this ends up being a constant situation for Europe where basically your top 4 squads all are filled with players that you're not surprised by, except the return of Whalers, who's coming back after a long stint in Valorant, which is really interesting. But of course, he's a player who's French, and if he's only willing to play with French rosters, that might limit his potential in terms of getting into the league. We'll have to, it remains to be seen.
I like this Team Lins, though. That's the one that I'm kind of pointing my eyes towards, right? Obviously, Lins, Cobra, Brezzy are players who I believe they've played together all, and I'm not entirely certain. Got to do our research on if Melko is French, because otherwise that seems like a pretty powerful, I would assume that's a French roster.
I think so. I'm pretty certain.
The first 3 are French. I think it'd be interesting to have your 4th not be French with that team. But either way, we've been seeing a lot of players really kind of come out of that sort of French region and I'm very excited to see how they're going to go ahead and hold their own. You know, could they run away with it? Are they just going to be kind of one of these teams that battles back and forth, right? I think the only thing that we do know is that at least for Linz, Cobra, and Brezzy, we have a really good idea of how those three players play. Melko, gonna be very curious to see what they can do and what they can bring to this team. How do they gel?
And another team that I guess we have to talk about here, feels like we've hit a lot on the head, but somehow we've still got more to go. And we would be really stupid to not chat about them, is, of course, the Stallions, because this is, of course, Zuma's love child, his foray into challengers, supports them incredibly with the Zumafia over there on his Twitch stream, follows them pretty much every competition they do. They took some unique approach this season by hosting tryouts, Dan.
Yeah, no, and this is kind of cool, right? You can tell, obviously, that's that main roster that we've kind of been watching, right? Of, you know, Swooty and Courage, Symbols, and Derek the Goat. That's their Stallions red. So now we have Stallions black, which is another Stallions roster as well, but that they're doing open tryouts for. So I saw a bunch of, you know, kind of a lot of wager kids, you know, challenger kids who maybe aren't super happy with their team. Try and go through these tryouts. Shout out my little man, Swag Checked. I guess he's not so little anymore, but Swag Checked. He used to run socials for NYSL back in the day. I met him at the Boston Major, the first Boston Major that was there. His mom was sitting behind us. It was actually really funny. Turns out this kid is cracked at COD. He's cracked at making memes on the timeline, and he actually got a good shouts in these tryouts as well. But what's interesting to me and why I kind of want to bring this up is I think this is a really cool idea that potentially other CDL teams could maybe kind of take an idea out of, which is like, you can even see here in the tweet where it says like only the 4 best will compete against Stallion Red for a full-time roster spot. So this is their way they're trying to create sort of a feeder system for Stallions Red. But I think the cooler thing to me is that, like, you know, we kind of talk about challengers as sort of, this is your opportunity to showcase that you are a good Call of Duty player. And things like this is another way that we're just kind of giving looks to maybe people that are oftentimes being overlooked in this scene, right? How many times again we hear friendship league, and, you know, sometimes these challenger rosters are just about who's friends and who wants to team together. But it's kind of cool being able to have, you know, people can have clips they can show out in these moments against, you know, really good players in these lobbies and showcase that, hey, you should be looking at me, maybe a more unknown talent for your challenger scene. Because I think what we're starting to see here, Enigma, even if we kind of talk about the CDL and look at that, a lot of times the players that are coming into that league and making waves are these players that it feels like seemingly nobody knew about, and then out of nowhere they're starting to make waves, right? Look at Hydra, obviously Mercules. You know, it's these names that maybe you haven't heard before that are now starting to be upgrades for these teams. And that's why when we look at, you know, things like this, and when you have somebody as powerful as Zuma behind it, it's really, really cool to see.
Yeah, I think to that last point, it is a wonderful thing to see because, I mean, challengers, this is basically drawing a lot of eyes to it. The hell of a lot of content starting to come out of it. Massive watch parties going on for challengers, which is something that lifts the whole scene, right? A rising tide takes all ships, and it's a case of we're certainly seeing that, and this is wonderful to spot. This could easily as well have been seen as like some sort of weird gimmick by the Stallions. No. There were so many people wanting to play in this. I saw one tweet from a guy who was kind of like, I've just waited about 12 hours to take part in these tries and didn't even get the opportunity. So it's just how many people were trying to be a part of it was insane. And we saw a couple of players show out. As you show there, 1,200 likes on this, like 140,000 views. A lot of people just wanting to be a part of it. Because you are right, people are breaking through in the weirdest of ways. When you think about how Mercules got into the league, it was because a agent essentially didn't give Ben Beans an opportunity to play in the league, so they just kind of last second dragged Merc in. He turned out to be insane. Then Toronto decided not to immediately sign him as some sort of loyalty thing to Beans, which fair play to him, but also Hercules is insane. And then OpTic desperately needed a change. Zinni calls. So it's all these weird ways in which different players can come into things. There's no reason to believe that this couldn't be one as well. Just that moment where you just break through that ceiling that you've been stuck under. So yeah, great to see. Very interested to see exactly how the Stallions continue to go from here, and how exactly you decide who gets to make that jump and who falls out of the main roster, because that's going to be a tough call for someone.
Very, very tough. Very tough. Lots of movement here in Challengers this week, obviously, but we did want to take a moment just to highlight some people who are doing some incredible work, who without them, we would not be able to be good at our jobs. So, Enigma, who do we want to kind of just shout out? Because if people don't want to keep up to date with Challengers, there are some fantastic accounts that they should be following.
Yeah, the list could be pretty much endless. Anyone that we've talked about through this, definitely go and follow. It'll be players, Stallions, OpTic Nations, etc. Make sure you go and follow all of those. But there are some people who, as Dan said, without them, I think the entire scene would be in a much worse place. They're just incredible. These are people like CDC Intel that challenged Intel to do a fantastic job. This is a man called Josh who runs everything over there. Honestly, I think without him, we'd be a little bit lost in the space.
Yep.
Challenger Stats also do an incredible job. This is Ben Carey, a man that we love to death because he does a hell of a lot. Things that if you guys have seen a production or some sort of stat or something, he is probably behind it. The Pits, this is copy. Everyone should know him, especially those of us on the European side. Never want to mince his words, but also does a lot of wonderful things for the scene and cares so deeply. And then, of course, over at Breaking Point, those fellas could definitely just focus on the league if they wanted to. They could definitely just do their thing, kind of take whatever they could from the league and run with it. But they focus on challenges because they care so much. They've been around for so long. These are fellas that really, really just want to see grassroots COD do well, and none more so than Easy Mac. I can't even get to tell you the amount of hours that fella puts into everything he touches. Insane. And the fact that he's willing to add challengers to the list as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, seeing what all 4 of those accounts and others are being able to put out is just so cool. You know, obviously we as not only casters, but also content creators are always kind of looking at stuff and seeing what their takes are and what we can kind of talk about. So it's been really great. You know, we definitely want to work with them through the season, you know, obviously to highlight some stats and some fun things like that. But that's all we got for this week in Challengers. Very, very excited to see how this first cup is going to go ahead and boil on out, because a lot of these teams that we talked about here today will have their chance to show out and have a chance to show that when it comes to that first Challengers Open at Major 1 in Dallas, they are looking to be that team to hoist the trophy. So if you got any questions, anything you want us to cover in the next episode, make sure that you are dropping it there in the comments. We would love to see it. But with that being said, I'm Dandro. That's Enigma. We'll see you next week.